I'm Andrea Wenzel. I'm at Temple University, and Jake and I co-host this. Jake, do you want to say hi?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Nelson. I'm an assistant professor at the Concrete School at Arizona State University.
And our goal with these conversations is to try to make connections between journalists and researchers who are interested in engaged journalism, to share experiences and swap ideas. And we've been doing these as monthly Zoom conversations leading up to our 2021 AEJMC pre-conference, which will be in August, and we'll share information about that with everybody later on. Today, we're going to focus on a sector of journalism.
Do you want to tell everyone what AEJMC is? Because I think we have a lot of people here who don't know what it is.
Yeah, and that's when I embarrassingly always mangle it. It's the Association of, what is it? or Association of Educators, and I don't know. I don't know what it is.
Conference of Journalism Educators.
Something like that. Yeah, every time journalism and mass communication. That thing that's a big conference and people who are interested in journalism and journalism educators, and we're looking forward to that. Today we're going to talk about a sector of journalism that's been doing the work of engaging communities since before the term engaged journalism was cool, I think, and that before a lot of us were using that term. And we're going to hear some of the lessons we can learn from how immigrant-serving media outlets have been innovating in engagement in their work, particularly how they've adapted their strategies during the pandemic. And I'm really thrilled that we have a lot of representatives from several outlets on this call, and we're going to hear more about them in a moment. And we're also going to hear from Zhang about the work she does with WeChat-based immigrant Chinese media. And I'd like to invite everybody as we go along today to share questions or comments in the chat, and we'll do Q&A a little bit later. Now I'm delighted to hand it over to Daniela Gerson. She's an assistant professor of journalism at California State University, Northridge, and she's the co-founder and editor of the excellent weekly immigration newsletter, Migratory Notes. About a year ago, Daniela authored a report with the Center for Community Media called Digital First Responders. I think we shared that in the RSVP. We'll also post it in chat. And I'll let Daniela share more about what they learned and what's been going on since then. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. As I said, it's really exciting to see everyone here. Liz, thank you for introducing yourself in the chat. I'd love to hear from other people where you are this morning, as well as any work you are doing with immigrant communities. And if you can just introduce yourselves as we go. And I totally get not showing your video, but if you're up for showing it, we'd love to see your faces, having gone through a whole semester of virtual teaching. And we did a poll at the end of the we did a poll at the end asking people why they didn't show their video. Top reason, Carrie, you got it? Hadn't done their hair, and we're in bed still. So after that, I became a little bit more like, put on your video. In any case, I'm very happy to be here, and I am just going to share briefly about the research we did last year. Did I share the right screen or the wrong one? Correct screen?
I don't know.
Okay. So I'm just going to share pretty briefly about the research we did last year, because I'm really thrilled to have so many outlets here with us who are doing the work.
Hi there, I'm pulling up for me. Sure. Thank you.
Of course I'm having, all right, here we go. So I think the first question, that I will often ask people is this question of, are you reporting for or about immigrant communities? And I think for the news outlets who you're going to hear from in a bit, that question is obvious. They're reporting for immigrant communities, and often they're also reporting about. A lot of us who have covered sort of the immigration beat, we've really reported more about and sometimes for. But I think there's often a divide that has a common space that's important to think about. For my own background, I have worked as an immigration reporter, covering both for radio and print and digital, and I run a newsletter called Migratory Notes. I've also worked on news outlets serving immigrant communities, particularly on a project I got to work on with Andrea and she in Alhambra, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. The report we did for so it's coming up on a year since we published this report, and it looked at innovation in immigrant-serving media outlets. It came out of partly this question of, I knew that many news outlets serving immigrants were facing incredible challenges. They were facing the same challenges that you see for news outlets generally, but they were also facing specific challenges that have to do with, one, people being able to get home country news in new ways. So you didn't need to rely on an immigrant-serving news outlet in the same way. And then also the rise of social media as a way to connect and get grounded in a new country, that also took away a traditional role of immigrant-serving media. But I also had a feeling that there was some innovation happening in news outlets connecting with immigrant communities in new ways, important ways, that could show a way forward not only for immigrant-serving media outlets, but also for basically any media outlet that is serving any community. Specifically immigrant communities, yes, but also just for any communities. And that is what we found. And we have some outlets here who are going to share a little bit about what they're doing. These are going to be useful, yeah, for any of you who are going into journalism. I saw there were a bunch of students here, because ultimately we're not going to ever be able, no matter what news outlet we're with, to cover every community, but there are also opportunities for partnership and learning from different news outlets as well. I am going to, I think one thing that's important to think about when we are looking at the difference in news outlets is often, and I'm sure Gary and Malik and Mohammed have heard this often, that, you know, immigrant serving outlets are about advocacy. They aren't necessarily about news coverage in the same way. Well, I think there's often a line, and Gary, you can speak to this more later, but of like advocating for your community, which isn't always advocacy. And so, you know, here we have one of the early on from Chicago in Arabic, I think this was from last year, right when the pandemic was happening, providing really critical information. I just had this conversation with Facebook about, as they're trying to define what is news and how to integrate more immigrant serving media outlets. But, you know, critical information is that news. Like this was a translation mostly at this point in this, right, Malik? I mean, maybe you can explain to us what this is actually. If you can tell us what this post was.
I mean, this is like as soon as we started getting the news about the lockdowns and just trying to help people make sense of it, there's a lot of information out there about what's open and what's closed. So we did, this is just pretty much our first post about what's closed. And then we followed up with more details about the specific types of businesses or services that are, you know, available for people to go to or not.
Interesting. And, you know, one of the things that I'm going to just skip ahead in my slides for a second because I want to, don't worry, Gary, I'm coming back to you in a second. But Malik, since, you know, tell us a little bit about Chicago in Arabic and how you came, like your role that you have taken on during the pandemic and how it shifted from what you initially set out to do.
Yeah, for sure. So Chicago in Arabic was started by a friend of mine and I back in 2016. The idea was to address the city of Chicago in Arabic for Arabic-speaking residents, visitors, and students. And the concept was that there's a lot of immigrants that were coming to the United States in that period of time, and there's about 250,000 people that speak Arabic in Chicago. But it feels like all the media outlets that speak Arabic are really talking about the community or addressing back home, right? It never addresses the city. It never addresses the city's, you know, architecture, history, lifestyle, events, whatever is going on, what the city offers the community, but rather talks about the community. So we were set to, you know, provide that that kind of information for our community to help bridge the gap between the community and the city itself, help people become more engaged. And we were never, we were never planning on being a news outlet. We never reported news on a day-to-day basis. But then when the pandemic started, you know, we had no choice but to be reporting more on a day-to-day basis. There was a lot of misinformation being spread out there and a lot of kind of like lack of information being out there. So we transformed into being more of a newsroom. We started reporting news on a day-to-day basis when needed and trying to translate all the resources that the city put out there. So resources for people that were, you know, being evicted or that couldn't afford to pay for the utilities or, you know, all different kind of things, you know, for mental health awareness, for, you know, abuse, you know, urgent lines if somebody's being abused at home or anything that was happening during the pandemic, we would translate resources and provide it out to the community. And we kept doing that. Chicago had a lot of issues during this period with a lot of unrest and over racial issues, and we had a lot of lootings and demonstrations and this and that. So during this period of time, we were reporting on a day-to-day basis for the community, just to keep everybody informed and trying to bring official Chicago sources like the Tribune or the city sources and stuff to the community in a language that they can understand.
And then Mark, another element you took on is you created a podcast, and the podcast has a slightly different role, right? Can you explain the podcast a little bit?
For sure. So the idea of the podcast was, when we started doing Chicago in Arabic, we just met so many really interesting and inspiring people that came here not that long ago, assimilated really well, gave back to their community, gave back to society, just did amazing work that we thought is really inspiring. And we thought it would be, great to highlight the stories of these successful immigrants as a model for other immigrants to say, listen, these people just came here 2 days ago and look what they're doing, and you do the same. So we started doing this, and then during the pandemic, we transformed. The podcast was called The Podcast by Chicago in Arabic because we couldn't figure out a name or couldn't agree on a name. So we called it The Podcast. And then during quarantine, we just called it Quarantine in Arabic. And we started, hosting kind of subject matter experts that talk about things that are pandemic related. So we hosted an accountant that talks about all the stimulus, what does it entail, what does it not entail, and how can people get to it, all people that talked about, mental health resources and different kind of stuff, kind of tips for surviving when you're in lockdown sitting at home. So we did that, Quarantine in Arabic. And afterwards, we got such good exposure that Lipton Tea reached out to us, and they offered us a sponsorship opportunity to do kind of a more organized podcast, do it in a more professional manner and record it as a show as well, not only audio. And we did the first season in the fall of last year. And actually, we're now in the process of publishing the second season. And we've got enormous success with it. The sponsorship, helped us big time to spread the word about it. Our first season scored about 750,000 views and listens across all platforms. And we're hoping that our second season will beat these numbers right now.
That's amazing. And if you compare those to your numbers last year, since we're checking in last year for the podcast.
Oh my God. The first few episodes of the podcast, it was pretty much my mom, my siblings, and my partner's mom and siblings are the ones that are listening. And then we grew to a few thousands. During quarantine, actually, we got a lot of attention because people are sitting at home and looking for this kind of content. So we had a few thousand views, between 2,000 and 5,000, 6,000 per episode. And then when we started doing it more professionally, we averaged about 70,000 views per episode.
That's amazing.
And obviously we spread our focus. Another difference is we spread our focus to be nationally, more like United States and Canada versus just Chicago. So we started hosting guests from outside of Chicago, LA and New York and Montreal, and trying to address these audiences as well. And that really helped us kind of scale our audience.
That's fantastic. I wanted to turn next to Gary Pierre. And Gary, for those of you who do not know, was the founding director of the Center for Community Media. He was a reporter with the New York Times. He was creator of Haitian Times. And you have been in this space for a good amount of time at this point. And you have also, if you could speak just generally, but also to the success you had with transforming events during this time.
Transforming? I'm sorry, I didn't get the...
Your work with the events. So if you could talk to a little bit about how you figured out a way to do virtual events, but also feel free to respond to anything else that we've brought up so far.
Yeah, well, event has been a top priority for us because we believe that's a way to really scale audience because a lot of people may not be interested in reading, listening, and watching, but people love getting together. And that was something that in the mid 80s to early 90s, news organizations realized that in order for them, they needed another revenue stream, and event was it. For instance, you see the Boston Globe doing all sort of events, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Everyone was doing event because it was a way for them to get additional revenue. So obviously, why not a small ethnic community outlet and Brooklyn. And so our first year we participated in the Labor Day Parade on Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, where we had a float. And then the second year we got sponsors to do that. And so that has been a tradition for us since the beginning. And so when COVID came, we were really despondent. Daniela had interviewed me right during the beginning of the pandemic, and I told her, I don't know how we're gonna do this because there's no way. And then, the kicker is that we organized a concert, virtual. We were really buoyed when we had 10, 20,000 people. This time we had 400,000 people watching the concert. And so we were able to get sponsors. So we just adapted to the new reality. And as everyone has done, it's not just, the Haitian Times, because we found ways to be creative. And since people were into virtual events, so we just pivoted to doing our events virtually. Just last week on Tuesday, we had a major conversation about the state of the Haitian community kind of thing. And we had Zhang, who's a Grammy Award musician winner, and some other really sharp people out of Haiti. And we got a few thousand views, which is incredible when you think about it. If you had an event at an auditorium somewhere, the most you would get 300-400 people, and you think it was a huge success. And now you're talking about different set of numbers, and as Malika was saying, like, we broaden our audience so much. I mean, people we didn't even think about now. We're able to get people from Canada. And something interesting happened last week during the conference, during the conversation. Everybody wanted us to speak Creole because we had so many viewers out of Haiti, which we don't think of Haiti as a main audience, but this time there were so many people watching, making comments about, can you guys, speak a little Creole? And that even kind of opened up some opportunities that we weren't thinking about. So,
I think that's a really interesting point, Gary, that's come up over many different communities, whether it's Vietnamese with Noi Viet or with Oi here in Los Angeles, or the Gazeta, is that the home, so on one hand, people can get news from back home or from elsewhere, but that actually your audience also for an immigrant-serving media outlet is no longer limited to the geography where you're located. It's the immigrant diaspora community, and then it's also often the home country community that has ties to the diaspora. And so that's actually been a real growth space.
Yes, and we want to exploit that in a good way. In a good way. But I think when we come back, what I see happening now, going back, I'd love to do the festival live with people in attendance, but also it's a great opportunity to live stream it to audience, because the technology is so available readily. I mean, before we tried to do live shows, it would cost us like $40,000. Now I don't think it'll cost us $4,000 to do it. And so there's a lot of opportunities. I think people looking for different ways to monetize your business, we have to be creative, because once we pass the pandemic, I believe that, I hope that, we're able to get back to a lot of the things that we did well and really scale them now. We can't using technology,
Yeah.
like Jarvis always says, do what you do best and then post the other ones.
Thank you. I want to turn next to Mohammed. If you can share a little bit about your journey, and you've also really taken advantage of the digital to create a broad audience. And did it start with math videos? Am I recalling correctly, on YouTube?
Yeah, in the beginning, and what I was trying to do is help with those community who doesn't understand the language. So it was kind of like tutoring for math, and like I think Khan Academy was doing. That's what I started. But before I talk about that, I just want to say thank you guys for the team, Daniel and the team. Since the report came out, Department of Health and contact us. We partner with the Department of Health, and since then we've been doing a lot of reporting about the pandemic. Right now, we have low infection in the community rate in the community for the COVID, and also high vaccine rate also. So we've been since November we become a partner with Department of Health. So we've been doing
that is
great.
Fantastic. And for those who don't know, because I realized I didn't fully introduce you, Mohammed also runs. So you were formerly a car service. Are you still doing car service driving as well?
For the Uber and Lyft, yeah, I was doing earlier.
And many members of the Somali community in Seattle, where you're based, are also car service drivers. Is that right?
Yep. No.
And so there's a special importance of when we spoke last spring, the community was really under threat, both financially and also health-wise. And so your work, and you create a digital television station, was incredibly important of getting the word out.
Yeah, they were not getting the information they needed, so there was a lot of confusion at the beginning. And since then, we start, reporting all the information that they need. We bring people, we interview them all over the people who has respecting the community, different fields. So we've been doing like a lot of those outreach for the community, and I think we found out like most of the Somali community here in Washington State, they were Facebook users. So we put a lot of time on that, that outreach the community. Right now, the only source they get information right now is us, and that's what we have for like a lot of success on those, keeping the infection rate low and also vaccination rate high.
And to explain, you use Facebook, you do Facebook Live, right? Where you're streaming on Facebook?
Yep.
As well as using it to post, is that correct?
Yep.
And are you on other platforms? You're still on YouTube, right?
We do YouTube and Instagram, all that, Twitter and this service, but the majority of the people, we figure out like the easy access on Facebook, make them easier to get the information they need. So we focus on that area.
Excellent. It's great to see that you have been able to grow so much. And is your audience primarily in the Seattle area, or are you also seeing growth within the Somali diaspora elsewhere as well?
Yeah, we are. I mean, Somalian back home and here, they connected through social media. So we focus on like getting the information. The beginning of the program, we used to have the information back home to bring them here. Now we switched the other way around. We bring the information here back home. So that connection started like, more, more bring them together, I think.
Between here and there, and you create a bridge by bringing information. So some people back in Somalia are watching you to know what's happening in Somalia? Yeah,
I remember I visited 2 months ago over there, just trying to give them an idea what's going on and bring the information back from there to here. And it was when I got there, everybody actually knew me. I mean, they was talking to me from the airport, the hotels, in the street, So they knew you from your broadcast when you went into hotels and everywhere in Somalia. They had been watching you from here. Yep, they recognized me, and I just did reporting from there. Also, bring the story back here. So it was like that connection really exists, and it was very powerful. It was very important to have both sides on the news. The community. That's great. Thank you for sharing. So we've spoken a bit about, and I think the real importance that social media is playing in connection with news and also launching new outlets in terms of engagement. I mean, Gary, you were streaming on Facebook when you had a huge audience, for example, right? Yes. When you did and that really helped grow it. One of the things I also want to talk about is social media beyond social media based in the United States. And we're lucky to have a
scholar who's really focused on that here. So I'm going to turn it over to Zhang, who wrote this chapter for the report, but has also done extensive other research on WeChat.
Hi, everyone. My name is Chi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen and I will. Yeah, so I'm an independent researcher occasionally. Mostly I'm just running a zoo with 2 really young children in the house. But I've done a lot of research on immigrant media and misinformation on political misinformation on WeChat. But I guess I'll use my 5 minutes today to really take you through a really quick tour of the landscape of WeChat-based news outlets, which is hugely important for the Chinese community here, but still remains very opaque. So to begin with, WeChat is this all-in-one mobile app that primarily used by Chinese speakers all around the world. It does everything and it's irreplaceable. But what many people don't realize is that it also comes with a content publishing system. And so it's like having a WordPress built into a chat app. And that combination really has spawned a whole industry of content publishers, both in China and those that target diasporic communities here. There's a vast number of them. A lot of them are native to the platform, and these have become primary news sources for the Chinese community here. I'm going to refer to them as WeChat news outlets. In Chinese, they're called new media or self-media because a lot of them are not journalists and don't really consider their work journalism to begin with. And so, misinformation is a colossal problem there. Although I would say that it's also a better known feature of the platform, and what doesn't get discussed more is the remarkable diversity and specialization of WeChat news outlets for the Chinese community here, and the opportunity to really develop good and innovative work, of which Houston Align is an example. And so one area that's really seen a lot of growth is local WeChat outlets. So sometimes you would have a few for one area, and you would also have these outlets for areas with a lower Chinese population that previously wouldn't have been a viable media market. And so some of them are doing really incredible work, kind of like what Chicago in Arabic is doing. And I just want to really quickly amplify a few of them. So Houston Align, we featured it in the report, and along with Chinese in New York, the 2 of them are really distinguished in the quality of the local journalism they're doing. They cover a lot of local issues like schools and local elections and redistricting, policing, and they cover human interest stories coming out of the local Chinese community. And so they're really able to cover more extensive local coverage than previously possible. And then you also have Philly Chinese, which was started not too long ago during the pandemic by a web designer. And she was hoping to connect the local Chinese community better with pandemic and vaccine related information, but it has since become a lot more than that. And so a recent issue focused on a voter guide for the local judicial election. And then another area, you also have outlets focusing on politics and current affairs. And these, examples I've listed here represent more progressive Chinese voices. And these outlets really emerged out of a response to how polluted the information environment is in WeChat, and the heightened interest in politics by the Chinese community. So a lot of the people behind these outlets were actually key individuals and leaders in key social political movements within the Chinese American community in the past 5 to 10 years. And so a lot of them just started as passion projects, but there was a felt need, especially in the past 2 election cycles, to up their effort. And so they have evolved into larger operations. And so for audience engagement in WeChat, it's really kind of built into the platform itself. And that brings us to another feature of the platform, which is chat groups. which is very dominant in the platform. So for example, I'm in a lot of chat groups with my family back in China. I'm in groups revolving around, U.S. politics. I'm in one with a local hometown association and local alumni groups. And so, as you can see, a lot of these chat groups are also very topically focused and centered around local communities. Because for a lot of WeChat users overseas, the chat groups are really an important source of local community and support network. So some outlets have used this feature very intentionally. So Houston Online, for example, has formed chat groups during Hurricane Harvey in Houston, and also during the pandemic, and in response to the anti-Asian hate crimes, to really do information distribution and organizing. And so they actually run these chat groups. And it's also common for editors to join multiple chat groups in the local community to connect with their audiences and businesses, because your audience is really distributed in these chat groups in the same platform. And so to echo what has been said, the common theme in our discussion is that a lot of these immigrant-serving media are doing audience engagement before engagement even became a thing, and they're really embedded in their community. And these WeChat outlets are definitely do that. So a lot of the discussions and debates in the Chinese community take place within WeChat. So if you want to know what issues and viewpoints are important to the Chinese community, you kind of have to live and breathe WeChat, which a lot of these outlets do. And given how impenetrable WeChat is, not just for language reasons, but because of the platform design, it's not really available online on the open web. So for example, I can't really give you a URL to a chat group or even to a WeChat outlet. And so what that essentially means is that these WeChat outlets are really important sources of knowledge for what's important to the local Chinese communities. Yeah, and with that, I'll turn it back to Daniela, and I'm happy to look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Chi. I think, I wanted to open it up actually to our panelists to see if any of you have questions for each other in terms of your approaches or in terms of what Chi was talking about of the role of WeChat. So I don't know, yeah, Gary.
Yes, I have a question for Mo. Do you know of any associations of Lyft and Uber drivers around the country?
Mo, you're on mute.
The only thing that we have, I think the organization that formed like Somalian community formed that organization so they can ask more, for the Uber and Lyft. But we never have anything that from the other way around. It was just like community asking something from those companies, Lyft or Uber, and they ignore most of the time. So there's nothing.
But well, I think this actually raises two interesting questions. One is on a factual side, isn't there a ride sharing union in Seattle that you're part of?
Yes, there is. They keep sending information, asking, but they ignore. So they don't answer any questions for those two companies. So the communities feel left there. They ignore mostly.
I think the other element that question gets to, Gary, which I think actually connects to what she was talking about, is this question of how do you, especially for someone like myself who's not part of a community, of a ride sharing community, for example, how do you tap into all these different communities? And some are on WeChat, like particularly the virtual communities that are very strong in immigrant communities. Like, do you see Uber or Lyft drivers organizing on a certain social platform or connecting or sharing information?
And they already organize a lot, and they have, what can I say, and mostly this organization, they have their form is not effective. It can be, it's kind of like, since they don't have, and what do you call, help any financial, so they kind of they have office, they have they have meeting all the times, but they are not getting what they want. I mean, they're not effective in that way for the campaign makes any changes whatsoever.
Okay.
So right now, what they focus on, right, the city, so they can maybe go through the city, and maybe the change they were looking for, maybe they can go through the city official. So they're doing the other way around right now.
Interesting.
Part of it is for me, because I think taxi drivers, Uber, transportation workers are a captive audience. And I know that there's a large number of Haitians in that field, in that industry. And I was just trying to find a way to capture that information.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Do you find that they listen to your, that rideshare drivers are listening to your broadcast? Because I know from being in New York that many of the Haitian drivers would be listening to Radio Soleil or other Haitian radio stations while driving. Have you found people listen to your broadcast while as they drive, or did you freeze? I think you froze.
I did.
Interesting question. I mean, one of the places that we saw a lot of growth in the report was looking at Punjabi radio, which serves mostly truck drivers, and came out of, they had tried various different digital ways to connect with a highly mobile truck driver population. So initially it was sort of these two-way radios, like these sidecar radios. Then as people's plans opened up, they did much more with streaming and found that people could just stream all day. At a certain point, it was like an SMS service. They were they've done basically every iteration of audio news as a way to target their audience. Malik, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I have actually a couple questions, but first for Gary. So Gary, you mentioned that you've been getting a lot more audience from back home. Has that been a problem for you with sponsors? Because like in our experience, sponsors don't like a lot of audience being overseas because this is not a community they can tap on for commercial purposes.
Well, we haven't got any complaint because a lot of the audience in Haiti does not engage. Very few of it would engage here. For instance, like Western unions of the world, they don't mind it. In fact, they love it. My local sponsors, if the audience is large enough, they're okay. The excess, what can you do? But in terms of, we usually under promise and over deliver, so that when we have 400,000, well, I charge you $3,000 for sponsorship package. If 200,000 of these people are in Haiti, you still get a good deal with the 200,000 that are in New York and Miami. So that's what you have to be careful when you cultivate that audience, segment that audience to your local sponsors and figure out, you know exactly where the traffic is coming from. So monetize the traffic that they would need, they want for business or for community purposes. For instance, what we do in New York City, when we get the New York City ads, we just geo them. They tell us we want just your New York audience, and I'll charge them basically based on what audience they're targeting. If they want all of the traffic, then we'll charge them accordingly.
Got it. That's great. And my other question was for Cheese. So you mentioned that with the WeChat groups, I think that's a great idea, but you guys touch a lot on politics. And that's another thing that we were like running away from because it's like a very divisive topic. Politics and religion, we try to stay a mile away, but like we always get demands to engage because we don't live on an island. We are really engaged when there's things happening. So, my question to you, did you have any negative experience feeling like you're excluding a portion of your audience by taking a certain position, or are you trying to be bipartisan? How do you deal with this situation?
So I'm not a practitioner. I don't run it myself, but I know that for a lot of these WeChat outlets, that's also a special distinctive feature of the WeChat news ecosystem, is that there's no getting away from politics. Is big enough for there to be niche markets available for that to be viable. So outlets do stay out of politics. For outlets, the more prevalent trend is really to understand where the fault lines are and to speak to a point of view. And actually, Houston Online, since the last election, has really been involved in the center of a storm because the editor was going to form a fact-checking, volunteer fact-checking network that took on a more progressive stance, and so that turned away a lot of its audience to a competing local outlets. But the audience base is big enough. She's constantly finding new audiences as well. And also the point about some of your audiences not locally based. So a lot of the transnational are okay with the audience not just being in one location, especially for Chinese businesses. There are a lot of transnational education companies, and so that has a strong advertising base for a lot of these WeChat outlets, and they actually do see overseas audiences as potential future immigrants to the United States. How they're conceptualizing it.
Chi, you broke up a little bit, and so I'm going to just summarize in case everyone didn't catch, since I've followed some of Chi's work. So as Chi was saying, she's not actually producing a WeChat channel or as a news producer, but she's been studying generally across the United States how WeChat has been used for news. And one of the divides, I think, tell me if I got this right, is that there have been some outlets that are really focused on politics, and some that have been more general and geographic focused, but that politics has sort of permeated all of both those that were not initially focused. And I could definitely see, Malik, how you face, a challenge, especially because forget what's going on in the Middle East right now with Israel and Palestine. There's also I could imagine within Arab communities, there is so many conflicting opinions and people want to talk about that. And so how do you connect? And Gary can also talk to that because Haitian politics, to connect Haitians across different politics. I mean, these are some of the big, and I don't know enough about Somali politics, but I can imagine it there too. And I think that's like a really intense challenge of immigrant-serving news outlets.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because one of the reasons why I founded the Haitian Times was because there were two newspapers in the city, and they were basically a political left, political right, and no one was really talking about what was happening in the community. And so I sort of like threaded that needle and landed right there because the politics was so divisive that it was tearing apart the community. So this was a way to bridge the gap. Hence my motto on the logo that we needed to bring people together, not divide people because the politics was so divisive.
I don't know if I'm still breaking up, but you also might be hearing my son going through the tiles in the back. But I also wanted to add that because the Chinese American, especially the first generation Chinese community here has been going through such a tremendous amount of political socialization and consciousness raising in the past 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of division, but there's a lot of interest in politics as well. So a lot of that kind of content actually draws audience and people want to participate in the debate. And there's a process of formulating what Chinese American politics entails. And so that's also a major part of the content coming out of a lot of the special WeChat outlets specializing in politics.
Thank you, Chi. I wanted to also give some space for the audience generally to ask questions. We have about 15 minutes left. If there's anyone who would like to, that would be great. And Sarah, I also wanted to thank you for sharing about your experience in Santa Ana. I'm so glad that this has been useful and it sounds like a really interesting project. Nobody in the audience has questions? You're pointing to someone, Liz, I can't tell who.
I'm pointing to what I put in the chat, actually.
Do you want to share it?
Sure. So I am now the Director of Journalism Partnerships for Define American, and you may have heard of it because of Jose Antonio Vargas. And what I'm trying to do, I just got hired about 2.5 months ago, and one of my first conversations was with Daniela, which is great. But one of the principles of my job is to mentor young reporters and also to help them cover immigration and cover immigrant communities. So is this new media viable for journalists? Is anyone looking to hire? And if so, is this just a pipe dream down the road? But if you are looking to hire, meaning pay them, who are you looking for?
Well, I can start. We have had a really, hard time with that because I mean, our income is kind of like cyclical. We do a big project, especially podcasts. We make a lot of money off of it, and it takes for so long. So we don't have the income stability to hire somebody in the long run. So we've been, counting on, part-times, hiring consultants, having kind of like interns or fellows or things of that sort, with the hopes that we can stabilize our income to the point where we can promise somebody a job without knowing that we might have to let them go in a few months.
Anybody else?
Some
Well,
experience through, yeah.
we're blessed to have the Newmark School of Journalism. They provide, reporters ready to go. And then I told the dean that the other day that, this is like a godsend because we just have the right type of reporters. Not only do they have the skills, but they also have the cultural skills, and so this is where we recruit from, where we get a staffers, from interns to staff. We have 3 alum from the CUNY's Grad School of Journalism. I don't want to say the guy's name. But yeah, so we have a great relationship with the school, and we just find it to fill all the needs, both part-time and full-time, because we some of them are not, they want to be freelancers, believe it or not. We have some who want to be freelancers, so we really have a good plate to choose from.
Gary, can you also speak to Report for America? Because I think that might be useful for other outlets.
Yeah, Report for America, it's an organization that was founded about 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a great idea. The idea was to help at the time news deserts from Appalachia to the urban areas to pay a reporter position or two on the newspapers who couldn't afford to pay the salaries. So it now includes everyone, the Miami Herald, the San Francisco, everybody wants a Report for America fellow. We had one on staff. We have another one that's coming this year in June, actually next week. And then we have the first one, his contract was renewed for another year. So Report for America, and they're really great. They're very flexible. It's an organization by journalists for journalists. They understand the business. They know what you need. They know your level, and so it's very seamless to working with them as far as I'm concerned.
And I think they're trying to expand their reach. I mean, you mentioned they're in the big news outlets. They're also trying to expand their reach, specifically with immigrant-serving media outlets, for I understand. So they may be a source. They will pay, in some cases, half the amount. If I
half, all instances half.
It's half
of salary.
Yeah. So
and then provide some training, as whatever you need, they organize. And also they're very good about fundraising. They have a development person attached to us. And so in fact, we had a meeting with them the other day and strategized on ways to raise money. They also can be, what do you call that name? Pass-through organization for funders, because I'm a no-profit organization, but as a for-profit, I can't get grants per se, but Report for America will be the conduit for the grant. And they're very good. I mean, if anybody here is not aware of them, please do, because they can be your friend and help you quite a bit. Maleka, for instance, you know, you were talking about your financial challenges and stuff like that. Well, reach out to them, see what, you know, what you can work with them. I mean, if you want well, you are in Chicago, so my rep might be different, but I will get some phone, make some, you know, an email and say, hey, you know, I have a colleague in Chicago who's interested, you know, talk to him and see what if you guys can work together.
Yeah, that would be great.
And I talked to them last week, and they said that 50 of their nearly 300 core members are covering immigration.
Yes.
And they're at their papers. So that's a pretty good
immigrant
number.
groups. Yeah, or immigrant communities. Yeah. Well, no place is too big or too small for them. I mean, they're not going to base it on your size.
I wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to give space there. We have time for one more question if there's any other questions here. And if not, I just wanted to ask our panelists one final question, which is, you know, we, especially in journalism, and we understand it's cyclical and the challenges with the funding are very real right now. But what are, if you can share any of the successes that you have had and things that you're just particularly excited about right now, for where you feel like you're making an impact, where you're seeing growth, there's places that you feel basically, yeah, excitement with what comes next. Mohammed, you're actually smiling, so I'm going to let you go first.
First of all, again, what happened, the beginning of the program we started, it was like we were putting money on our side and we spent a lot of money. And this first time, actually the other way around. Right now, since we partner with Department of Health, they were like, they saw the report and said, we just want to help you. We want to, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. We're going to support you. What do you need? And based on that, last couple of months, it's just like a big change for us. And the community still become, they trust us more. So they also noticed the Department of Health, like, you know, this is the best way we can reach out the Somalian community, which is a large community living in Washington State. We never had what do you call, like Barry and the other team for advertisement. And we are really lack on that area. So I'm going to start working on that, how to get that, you know, for partnership with the companies. And I'm just excited. That's all I want to say, you know. And we want to thank you, our team, for Daniel and the great report you guys did on the media.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think I speak for everyone here that we're inspired by what you're doing. And so thank you for sharing and bringing it here. Gary, you've also, you've had growth due to also government contracts this past year.
Well, yeah, New York City's Mayor de Blasio issued an executive order 2 years ago mandating that 50% of the advertising that the city places and should go to local and community and ethnic media outlets. And that has really provided a lot of opportunities for us to grow in a real sense, because if they want to play the numbers game, we certainly can do that. Because I think the technology has allowed us to think outside of what we traditionally thought we were. At first, we thought we were a weekly newspaper, and we were, but now we could be a lot more than that. And we realized that there are audiences out there that they're waiting for us. Because one of the things that's happening, given the challenges in Haiti, the media outlets don't really have the money to do the kind of news that Haitians out in the diaspora are looking for. Because once you left, there's a certain way news is processed here in Canada and France than it is in Haiti. And so nobody is able to tap into that sensibility. And I think we were a place to do that. And we've had a meeting with Report for America where they had some really great ideas and things that we, we're going to try to execute in ways to build audiences and really be the agenda, set the agenda for the conversation around Haiti and Haitian communities. I think, we hope that we're able to exploit that opportunity.
Thank you, Gary. And for anyone who's interested, June 10th, you can hear more about Gary and reporting on Haitian communities across the diaspora. I'm happy to share that with you.
Nice.
And then Malak, what are you excited about?
So two things we're actually excited about. One, I mean, the podcast, we will keep pushing that. And we recently started, the city reached out to us to do interviews with some high profile politicians here in the city, just spreading the word about what they do. And this is just amazing for us because the higher the profile of the speaker, the more sponsorship opportunities we can get and the more exposure we get out in the city. So that's exciting. The mayor of Chicago just said a few days ago that she's going to dedicate all of her interviews to kind of minority serving media because there's too much, mainstream media that's been covering her. So we're trying to get on that opportunity as well. That's something that we're excited about. Another thing that we're doing, or we're trying to see if it's a viable option, we started an e-commerce website where we would sell t-shirts and mugs and things like that with messages that are about the US, but in Arabic, Chicago flag with something that says Chicago, but in Arabic, things like that. We hope that by doing this, we can be able to finance some of the other stuff we do that we're unable to finance, which is the content is not enough for us to get sponsorship. So those are two opportunities that we're focused on, and we're hoping that they will be big revenue producers for us.
I want to thank everyone. I'm going to turn it over to our organizers, Andrea and Jacob, but thank you for sharing and for showing up today, and she as well.
Thanks to all of you. And thank you, Daniela, for doing such a wonderful job of facilitating that conversation. Jake and I will share, everybody who RSVP'd will share around a link to the video of the conversation and a link to the chat. And we'll also let you know about our upcoming pre-conference at AAJMC in August. And if anyone has feedback for us or suggestions for conversations to have, we'd love to hear them. And I think that's it, unless Jake, there's anything else you wanted to add.
No, that's it. Yeah, thank you all so much for attending. And Daniela, thank you so much for doing such an awesome job moderating. This has been fantastic.
Yeah, thank you all for sharing. We really, really appreciate it. Everyone have a great day. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.